Be strong in the grace. That's a clue that our study this morning is going to come from the 2nd of Timothy chapter 2 and verses 1 to 7. But before we do so, we're going to start in the Old Testament because there's a background, I think, to this segment in the second chapter of the 2nd of Timothy. If you would come to Deuteronomy chapter 31, we have that moment of time when Moses passed on the charge of the truth to Joshua. And the record puts it this way when it says in Deuteronomy chapter 31, and reading verses 7 and 8, it says, Moses called unto Joshua and said unto him in the sight of all Israel, Be strong and of a good courage, for thou must go with this people unto the land which Yahweh hath sworn unto their fathers to give them, and thou shalt cause them to inherit it. And Yahweh, he it is that doth go before thee. He will be with thee. He will not fail thee, neither forsake thee. Fear not, neither be dismayed. And in fact, if you come to the 23rd verse, you'll notice that as that conversation came to an end between Moses and Joshua, the record says in verse 23, And he gave Joshua the son of Nun a charge, and said, Be strong and of good courage, for thou shalt bring the children of Israel into the land which I swear unto them. And you see, with those words, brothers and sisters, Moses transferred the burden of leadership, the leadership of Israel, to Joshua. That young man who'd been his servant and his minister. It was going to be a watershed moment in the history of the nation, a transfer of responsibility, a passing on of the charge. Now let's just see that on the screen, that we might see some of those key ideas, because I think each of those things highlighted, you see, were significant. The importance of being strong, having confidence in the divine help, learning to move beyond fear and not succumbing to discouragement, and finally accepting the burden and the privilege of the truth's charge. And why were all these things important? Well, it's because of what we're told in verse 14. Deuteronomy chapter 31 verse 14 says, And Yahweh said unto Moses, Behold, thy days approach that thou must die. Call Joshua, and present yourselves in the tabernacle of the congregation, that I might give him a charge. So you see, the circumstance that brought forth all of these words from Moses to Joshua was this fact, that Moses was about to die. And Moses wanted to know that when he did die, that the legacy of his work with Israel would be preserved. Not because, incidentally, it was Moses' legacy, it was God's legacy, and it was God's people. But his earnest desire was that Israel would continue to be guided in the way of the truth after he had gone. And to ensure that that happened, he passed the charge of the truth onto his spiritual successor. And in effect, what Moses is saying, don't you think, brothers and sisters, he's saying, now don't you lose the truth, Joshua. I'm depending on you to carry on all that has been begun in this time and in this place. He passed the mantle of responsibility to Joshua because in that young man was the same faithful spirit in the truth that he had shown. So what we've really got, you see, in Deuteronomy 31 is an old man passing on the charge in the face of his impending death, which he knew was shortly to come. Now that's interesting, because if you come to the 2nd of Chronicles and chapter 28, we have now some words from David many generations later. In fact, at the time when David himself is described as being old and full of days. And in the 1st of Chronicles chapter 28, we're told these words in verse 20 when the record says, And David said to Solomon his son, Be strong and of good courage, and do it. Fear not, nor be dismayed. For Yahweh Elohim, even my God, will be with thee. He will not fail thee, nor forsake thee, until thou hast finished all the work for the service of the house of the Lord. And we suddenly realize, brothers and sisters, that that charge from David to Solomon is all couched in the same language, is it not? These aren't David's words. The terms which he used to instruct his son were taken from an earlier episode in the time of Moses passing on the charge to Joshua. And out of the mouth of David now comes the same charge to his son in a later generation, you see. And why was all this important? Well, because if you come to the 1st of Kings and chapter 2 and verses 1 and 2, we're told this in the first book of Kings, that this was the circumstance that brought forth that occasion in the 1st of Chronicles chapter 28. 1st of Kings chapter 2 verses 1 and 2 says, Now the days of David drew nigh, that he should die. And he charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth. Be thou strong, therefore. Show thyself a man. Keep the charge of Yahweh thy God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes and his commandments and his judgments and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that thou mayest prosper in all that thou doest, and whithersoever thou turnest thyself. And so we suddenly realize again that here's all the language, you see, from Moses to Joshua, now granted from David to Solomon. An old man was about to die, and history was about to repeat itself, you see. And David was anxious to ensure that the heritage of the truth was going to be preserved in a generation to come. So this was David's charge to Solomon, but he patterned his language on the story of an earlier man of God. He used the same expressions. Now here's the question, brothers and sisters, from this little parallel of circumstance and language. Why did David use those terms? And the answer is that David believed that what he was passing on to Solomon was the same sacred heritage of the truth that Moses had passed on to Joshua. And he saluted that thought by using the same language. And what David was really saying is, Solomon, I'm counting on you to keep the truth in the generation to come. Do not fail me, my son. He passed the charge on to the next generation in the face of his impending death. Now, why that's interesting is because suddenly, brothers and sisters, we see words jumping off the page in the 2nd of Timothy. Because as we come to the 2nd of Timothy, we will find that really what this letter is about is it's the charge from Paul to Timothy. It's many generations after David to Solomon, and many more from Moses to Joshua. But just look at this little collection of phrases out of the 2nd of Timothy, chapter 2, chapter 4, chapter 1. Thou therefore, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. And just as Moses had promised Joshua and David to Solomon, God won't fail thee, God won't forsake thee, Yahweh shall deliver from every evil work, God will preserve thee, is the promise of Paul to Timothy. God has not given us the spirit of fear. Don't be dismayed, don't be discouraged. Thou therefore, he says, I give thee a charge before God. And we suddenly realize that all of the language with which Paul passes on the charge to Timothy in this very epistle, there's no mistaking the tenor of the language or the source of the words, is there, brothers and sisters? He's quoting from Moses and from David. And do you know why that was important? Because, well, let me put it on screen for you. Why was all this happening? Because the 2nd of Timothy chapter 4 and verse 6 is going to go on to say, "For I am now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand." The circumstances were the same, were they not, brothers and sisters? An old man facing death was about to die and would pass on the charge before death came upon him. And that now, brothers and sisters, brings us to the 2nd of Timothy and chapter 2. Now, no wonder the Spirit overshadowed these writers in this way, that Paul will take his words from the very language of succession already noted in the scriptures of truth. This is the background, we believe, to the 2nd of Timothy and chapter 2. He quoted from Moses and he quoted from David because he believed that he was passing on the same charge. There's a link between generations here, brothers and sisters, and a powerful lesson that we're going to draw attention to at the conclusion of our study, God willing, this morning. So 2nd of Timothy chapter 2 and verse 1 says, "Thou therefore, my son, be strong." Do you know, we're told in Exodus 33 verse 11 that Joshua was described as a young man. And when David gave Solomon a charge in the 1st of Chronicles chapter 29 and verse 1, he called him young and tender. And Paul will now place the mantle of responsibility on Timothy, of whom he will say, "Let no man despise thy youth," 1st of Timothy chapter 4 and verse 12. And each of these young men were going to face the tremendous burden of guarding the challenges, guarding the truth amidst challenges in their own generation, but without the guidance of their mentor who would soon be gone. And in their times of loneliness and despair, these words, you see, of the charge were intended to come back and ring in their ears. "Be strong, he will be with thee, he will not forsake thee. Fear not, neither be dismayed. God will be with thee." Oh, brothers and sisters, when I read those words in the 2nd of Timothy chapter 2 and verse 1, with all that comes from the Old Testament background, I can feel all of Paul's love poured into this farewell to his dear son in the faith. Can you feel it, brothers and sisters? Timothy would know where Paul had taken his words from. It was a call to the guardianship of the truth itself, and a promise to Timothy that even when Paul was gone, God would be with him. Don't ever forget that, my son, is what Paul is saying. And you notice he's not asking Timothy to be strong in his own self-reliance. No, he says, "Be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus." And that grace would be sufficient for all his needs, because Christ's strength would be made perfect in Timothy's weakness. And Paul wasn't just concerned that the truth be guarded in the life simply of Timothy himself. Now, what he was anxious about, as verse 2 goes on to say, he says, "The things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also." You see, he didn't just want Timothy to guard the truth with his own life. He knew that his own time was ended. He gave counsel to provide for what we might describe here as a true apostolic succession. Not an unbroken line of holy men appointed to office, but the faithful passing on of true apostolic teaching. "Timothy," he says, "I want you to perpetuate the truth by carefully committing it to other brethren who will take up the charge beyond you." Now you see, Timothy had heard that from the Apostle Paul, had he not? He knew Paul's gospel. He knew Paul's teaching. But what Paul was anxious to ensure is that Timothy would guard the truth not only in his own generation, but that he also would find the means to pass it on to the generation that lay beyond that young man. And so verse 2 he says, the same, that truth which thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others. So do you notice there were two critical virtues to these men that Timothy was to search out? Firstly, they must be faithful to the truth in themselves. But secondly, they must be capable of thoroughly and carefully teaching it to others. And Timothy was to commit the truth to them. It's a lovely word in the Greek, brothers and sisters. It means to entrust something to another for safekeeping. So Rotherham says, the same entrust thou to other faithful men, such as shall be competent to teach others also. And the truth has ever needed such men. Those who can take the truth and break it small and give the sense and cause others to understand it. And you see, I think what Paul is saying, brothers and sisters, here, and it's a very wonderful thing for us to remember in our own lives in the truth and in our ecclesias. I think what Paul is saying to his son in the faith here is this: Timothy, you must think beyond yourself. Think beyond yourself. Think beyond the ecclesia of today. Think about the ecclesia of tomorrow. Set your attention on the preservation of the truth, beyond what you can do. Think, Timothy, about what will be best for the truth. You know, brothers and sisters, we need to think about that too. In everything we do in ecclesias, you know, we tend to have, every ecclesia has problems. We're going to have problems this side of the kingdom. Some are large and some are small. But it's so easy in our ecclesias, brothers and sisters, to think about what we're going to do about this problem in our ecclesia. And we'll either do something or not do something, or we'll contend for the matter, or we'll decide to leave it alone. And we imagine that we're making that decision for our ecclesia. No, we're not. We're making the decision that we make on behalf of the whole community of the mystical body of Christ. And every other ecclesia depends upon you to handle that matter with integrity. Because it's a decision made on behalf of a community, not just your meeting. What will be best for the truth isn't just about what suits us as an individual or what we might decide we're doing or not doing in our ecclesia. Everything we do is about the body of Christ, ultimately, and how the heritage of the truth might be guarded in our midst. Timothy, think beyond yourself. So with what spirit then should Timothy seek to accomplish this task? How might he be strong in this work? Well, says Paul, he's going to answer that question now with three metaphors that were taken from the common circumstances of life in those times. The soldier, verses 3 and 4, the athlete, verse 5, and the farmer, verse 6. And each of these was chosen to give further detail on how Timothy would need to be strong in safeguarding and preserving the truth. But the common thread was that success would come based upon dedication. Now, I just want you to stop and think for a moment, brothers and sisters, about how thoughtful these metaphors were that Paul draws to Timothy's attention. The figure of the soldier was drawn from the military might of the Roman army. The figure of the athlete was drawn from the excellence of the Greek games. And the figure of the farmer was drawn from the pastoral cycle of the Jewish calendar. And suddenly we realize how all-encompassing, how universal these three ideas might be. One from Roman times, one from Greek times, one from Jewish times. These were going to be universal in their application. And this first one, verse 3, thou therefore endure hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. In the Greek it suggests that Paul was really asking Timothy to join him on the journey. The American Standard Bible says, suffer with me. Rotherham says, take thy part in suffering hardship. The Revised Standard Version says, share in suffering. It was really a reaffirmation of chapter 1, verse 8, be thou partaker of the afflictions of the gospel. And so the first of these metaphors, the metaphor of the soldier, Paul was really saying to Timothy that the truth will bring a measure of suffering into your life, perhaps even persecution. But I ask you to accept that as a burden for the truth's own sake. And Timothy, he says, if you do, know that you're sharing it with me, I who have gone before you. Now, the life of a soldier, brothers and sisters, was a life of commitment to a cause that was greater than themselves. And that's exactly what the truth is. It's a cause greater than any one of us. And from the soldier, Timothy was going to learn the principle of endurance in coming to spiritual maturity. And so the apostle goes on to say in the 4th verse, concerning soldierhood, good soldierhood, he says, no man that warreth entangleth himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him who hath chosen him to be a soldier. In fact, incidentally, in the Roman system of things, a Roman soldier was already considered to have a career, so he was not allowed, he was not permitted to engage in husbandry or in merchandise or in mechanical employment, not while he was on active service. Civilian activities were forbidden to Roman soldiers because they could divert the soldier from the single-minded objective that he must have at all times. A good soldier had to be absolutely committed to the cause he fought for, and nothing must distract him from that. Anything that would distract from the noble aims of his calling, as this verse says, was considered to be an entanglement, and the word means to braid or to weave together. So the Revised Standard Version says, no soldier on service gets entangled in civilian pursuits. Now, brothers and sisters, we live in an age of entanglement. Everything about us represents entanglement. It's the one thing a soldier ought not to do, says Paul. And what was the one thing that he must be left free to pursue? Well, the verse says, at the end of the verse, instead, that he may please him who hath chosen him to be a soldier. So you see, the service of a captain and the honour of a cause were everything to a good soldier. They transcended all else in his life. The sole aim was to please the one who had enlisted him. And Paul says, Timothy, you have been enlisted by Christ, and fighting for him will demand all that you can give. You see, interesting thing with regard to the soldier, brothers and sisters, it wasn't about personal success. It was about communal victory. And one of the challenges of our age is that the world's pendulum has swung to the far extreme that it's all about me. It's all about individual liberty. It's all about doing whatever I want to do. We're entangled in a world that's like that. But the truth, in reality, brothers and sisters, is not about the individual. It's about the community. We need to learn the lesson of the soldier. The soldier fought for the honour of his commanding officer. It was simple, and everything else represented entanglement. And yet we get so caught up, do we not, brothers and sisters, in our lives, in our activities, in our devices. and the question of who our captain is and what cause we're really fighting for can so easily be lost. Ooh, wasn't that sharp in focus that Paul brings Timothy's attention right down to the essence of what the truth's all about? We're in the battle, brothers and sisters, against sin. We've been enlisted by the greatest commander of all. And you know, in this metaphor of the soldier, Paul was uncompromising in warning Timothy what the truth would demand. He didn't pretend that the truth would be easy. He didn't suggest that the way would be smooth. And it's good that we grasp that lesson, isn't it, brothers and sisters? It will be hard, says Paul. It will be difficult. It will be challenging. But the cause itself, Timothy, is of such transcending importance that you must commit to it 100%. Be a good soldier. There are times, brothers and sisters, where I think we should all learn that lesson of good soldierhood in the truth service. And the second, which is crucially different, verse 5, is the metaphor of the athlete when the record says, if a man also strive for masteries, yet he's not crowned except he strive lawfully. And the word for strive here in the Greek is athleo, and it refers to the contestant who strove for success in the Grecian games. If a man contend in the games, says the American Standard Version. Now, the thing is about those games, the Greek games, is there was a strict code of honour for competition. In fact, every athlete had to take an oath that they had spent at least 10 months in vigorous preparation and that they would strive according to the rules. And those rules were strictly enforced. Any tricks, any stratagems were regarded as acts of disloyalty to the athlete's code, and they would result in disqualification. There was to be no cheating in the games. That was the rule. You can't ever cheat. That dishonours the whole process, the whole principle of what the games were for. So there was a sense of real commitment here, brothers and sisters, that you trained for 10 months. You must on oath say that you had done that before the games commenced. So to be an athlete required rigorous training and dedicated preparation. And what was it all for, even if the race was won? Why, simply a Stephanos wreath of leaves. But you see, it wasn't really about the laurel wreath, was it? It was not the prize so much as the honour associated with winning it. But how much greater, of course, is the crown to which Timothy was called. So Timothy was being exhorted to be well prepared and scrupulously honest in all his dealings in the truth. We oughtn't to need to say this, brothers and sisters, but there is never a justification for any sense of cheating or compromise in the truth that's so common in the world to achieve one's ends. The truth has its own code of honour, does it not? The Spirit of Christ is our guardian waymark and benchmark at all times. We're asked to behave according to Christ's standards. And there are things that happen sometimes in ecclesial life that perhaps, at least in diminished form, still represent the skullduggery and the scheming and the manipulation that ought not to be seen in the community of the saints. The Revised Standard Version says, an athlete is not crowned unless he competes according to the rules. So if you were going to win, and you're not allowed to cheat, then to win as an athlete required above all else the spirit of complete discipline. You would win because you were the best, and you'd striven according to a code of honour. And then Paul says in verse 6, the husbandman that laboureth must be first partaker of the fruits. And the metaphor changes from athlete to farmer. Now, it's true, as the authorised version says, the husbandman that laboureth must be first partaker of the fruits. It's true, isn't it, in a sense, that a farmer has an entitlement to being the first to taste the fruits of the crop or the harvest that he's watched over. But I think the point of the metaphor on this occasion in 2 Timothy 2 and verse 6 is really about the diligence that the farmer must first show if he's going to have any harvest at all. Here's 3 cross-references that could be helpful. Proverbs 20 verse 4 says, "The sluggard will not plough by reason of the cold, therefore shall he beg and harvest and have nothing." Ecclesiastes 11 verse 4 says, "He that observeth the wind shall not sow, and he that regardeth the clouds shall not reap." James chapter 5 and verse 7 says, "Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience for it until he receive the early and the latter rain." And of course, one of the great lessons about farming, brothers and sisters, is if you think it's too windy and you better not sow, it's not good in terms of the results that follow. Or if you think it's too wet and therefore you better not reap, well, the same consequence will be that there will be no harvest. And farmers have to learn that sowing and reaping is part of a law of nature that they can never set aside if they want to have a harvest in the first place. They've got to get out despite the conditions, which frequently are not ideal. Isn't that true in ecclesial life? And family life. How often does the problem arrive at the very worst possible moment of time, when the wind is blowing and the rain is pouring? Farmers have to say, "Yep, but if we don't deal with this now, there'll be no harvest." Actually, the margin of the authorised version says, and I think there's truth in this, the husbandman labouring first must be partaker of the fruits. And I think that's the real spirit of this metaphor, you see. What it's saying is that the farmer labours, he toils, he works to plough and to sow, and he works to nurture long before any fruits are possible. He sleeps and he rises night and day until finally the fruit is brought forth. He puts forth the sickle because the harvest has come, but it has only come because he's laboured. So being strong in the truth, Timothy, says Paul, also requires the spirit of nurture with great patience and always with an eye toward fruit for the honour of God. And then Paul says this in verse 7, "Consider what I say, and the Lord give thee understanding in all things." Now that little word consider, noeo, means to ponder. I want you to ponder these metaphors, says Paul. He'd given them to focus Timothy's mind on the 3 ways in which he must show himself to be strong in guarding the heritage of the truth. And in the 7th verse, I think what he's asking Timothy to do is to think out the meaning of the metaphors by further meditation. So I think what Paul is saying is, you go away now, Timothy, having read what I've written to you, and you think about what these metaphors might really mean in your work in the truth. And incidentally, his statement wasn't expressed in the hope that the Lord might bless Timothy with further understanding, because most manuscripts render the phrase here in the imperative. So it should really be translated, as with Rotherham's, "Think as to what I'm saying, for the Lord will give thee discernment in all things." Paul was confident that if Timothy thought about these matters, that God would grant an enlargement of understanding to him. But he needed to ponder the fullness of those things and learn how to use them in his work. But if he meditated upon their secrets, he would be blessed with sound insight and right judgment on how best to apply them. And here's the thing, brothers and sisters. I don't think that Paul offered these metaphors simply out of interest. I think he was being very specific about what he wanted Timothy to think about as to how he might be strong for the truth. So here it is, the summary of the metaphors. Just think about the power of these. So you see, in situations which required courage and endurance, the soldier would teach Timothy to be strong in the spirit of absolute loyalty, since the soldier fights for his commander. But in situations which required effort and excellence, the athlete would teach Timothy to be strong in the spirit of complete discipline, since the athlete strives for himself. But in situations which required nurture and perseverance, the farmer would teach Timothy to be strong in the spirit of patient labour, since the farmer toils for others. Now, do you see how beautifully all-encompassing these metaphors are? You see, only if he was strong in all three ways would his work of keeping the heritage of the truth be successful. And Paul knew with all his heart that if this son of the faith thought about it deeply, he would be given the understanding he needed. What he was really saying is, as each situation comes upon you, Timothy, when I'm gone, you will need to ask this question. For this moment, for this matter, do I need to be a soldier or an athlete or a farmer? Does this situation call for courage and endurance, or for effort and excellence, or for nurture and perseverance? What am I facing here? And what will be best for the truth on this occasion? There's great wisdom in these words, don't you think, brothers and sisters? Because there are some times and some things where we do need to earnestly contend for the truth. And good soldierhood is required. And there are other things so difficult and so draining where we need the endurance and the discipline of the athlete to follow something through right to the end. But there are other times where we really need the spirit of the farmer to persevere, that we might bring forth something because of patience, and where to be either a soldier or an athlete was not the right course of action. Part of our wisdom, you see, is learning how we might apply each of these in different circumstances in our work in the truth. Timothy was only ever going to be the Lord's instrument as Paul was, but he would learn how to apply each of these three. Don't you think, incidentally, brothers and sisters, that probably Timothy's natural inclination was probably to be a farmer? What Paul was saying is there will be times when you need to be a soldier, and other times when you will also need to be an athlete, but choose wisely. And answering these questions in our own work in the truth service will help us to know in what way we also should be strong for the truth on different occasions, what will be best for the truth in each circumstance. Ought we to be a soldier? Ought we to be an athlete? Ought we to be a farmer? You see, Paul was so inspired by Christ's courage to endure suffering like a good soldier. He was so amazed at Christ's determination to agonize with effort like a good athlete. He was so moved at Christ's toil to bring forth fruit in others like a good farmer that Paul committed his life to following his Lord, and now he would ask Timothy to follow him as he had followed Christ. And perhaps what these verses teach us, brothers and sisters, the 2nd of Timothy, chapter 2 and verses 1 to 7 is this, that we're part of the continuum of the truth. Just part of its continuum. The sacred charge of the heritage of the truth has never changed. And we're not at liberty to change it. Our task is to guard it. And by the time we come to pass it on to others, we need to know that what we're passing on is the same heritage that we received. That we haven't compromised it, or diluted it, or altered it, or betrayed it. If the truth is lost, it will either be because those passing on the charge have failed to realize its importance, or because those receiving the charge have failed to appreciate its preciousness. Joshua was asked to complete the conquest of the land and oversee its settlement, but in so doing he would continue a work which Moses had already begun. And Solomon was asked to build the house of God and finalize the system of worship, but in so doing he would simply continue a work that David had already begun. And Timothy was asked to confirm the ecclesias and provide pastoral care for the truth, but he would but continue a work which Paul had already begun. So let's close, brothers and sisters, with a couple of questions just to ponder in our own life and circumstance. So what do we think the greatest challenges the ecclesia will face to guard the heritage of the truth? And how might we be strong to help preserve it? Keep the charge. And in fact, what is the heritage of the truth with regard to matters of doctrine, or matters of reading, or matters of music, or matters of fellowship, or matters of marriage, or matters of prayer, or matters of conduct, or matters of separation? What is the heritage of the truth? In each of those things, what is the heritage of the truth? And how will we guard it? And the one thing that's certain, brothers and sisters, is if we don't know what that heritage is, we cannot guard it. This is a challenge that every generation in the truth must come to get to grips with. What is the heritage we have received? How might we faithfully pass it on? So let's make pledge, brothers and sisters, that we will capture the spirit of the counsel to this young man so eloquently given by Paul here in the 2nd of Timothy chapter 2, and that we will be strong to continue a work which has already begun long before we came on the scene. In the words of a hymn which puts it this way: my God, my Father, make me strong when tasks of life seem hard and long, to greet them with this triumph song: thy will be done. Draw from my timid eyes the veil to show where earthly forces fail. Thy power and love must still prevail. Thy will be done.